Obviously, I can't talk specifically about bikes that are in development, but
No.
what I can say is that, for the longest time, whenever I talk to customers and I say, and I usually do this, whenever we're doing some research, the last question I ask is, look, if you had an elevator pitch moment with Sid Arthur, what would you tell him we should make next? What's the thing we should do next? And the number one answer is always 650 Himalayan.
Hi, my name's Dave Darcy, and you're watching Motorcycle Adventure Dirt Bike TV. Earlier today, I had the privilege of interviewing Mark Wells, Chief of Design for Royal Enfield, the motorcycle company that sold 1 million motorcycles last year. And we got a discussion rolling about the 650 Bear, but with those spy shots of the Himalayan 650, I couldn't resist. I had to ask him some questions, and we had an interesting discussion. Anyway, sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and listen to this chat. It's a cracker.
Motorcycle Adventure Dirt Bike TV is proudly supported by Liat, Giant Loop, Bikes Only Transport, Muck Off, Rally Ray Products, Motul, Pirelli and Acerbis.
And remember, keep your filters clean and your throttle on.
Mark Wells, Chief of Design for Royal Enfield, so pleased to have a yarn today about this bear, this Scrambler 650. Mate,
Yep.
what a cracking bike. I mean, I'm generally in the adventure world and a little bit more dirt oriented, but I couldn't help seeing Nick Sanders riding one of these around Europe at the moment. I mean, he's done 83 days, 19,000 kilometres, and he's currently up at Nordcap and he's loving the bike. Yeah, so I guess what I wanted to do is gauge from you, the concept of that bike and what you were chasing, and then over the top of that, in the horizon, there's the spy pics of a Himalayan 650 or 750, and how does that fit in with the blend of what's happening now?
Understood. So the start with the concept of this bike. So as Royal Enfield, we've got an amazing heritage in the early uh, off-road bikes, scramblers, hare and hound race bikes, and international six-day trials. Our whole heritage is kind of in that space. There's an amazing story. There's a guy called Eddie Mulder. Eddie was a young Californian 16-year-old living out in the desert. And he was a desert racer. He raced on a little bike that his dad had built for him. And he was seen by a local Royal Enfield dealer. And they said, we want you to ride a bike for us. So they gave him a Royal Enfield Fury, which was a 500 single, but kind of roughly based on a Bullet, but a race build. And he went to the Big Bear race in California, where they started from Lucerne in the desert, and then rode out to Great Rock in a big sort of loop over the Mojave Desert, and then back up the mountain up into Big Bear town itself. And we had him out in California for the launch, and he told the whole story, and it was amazing. He says he was only 16. He said he was sat on the start line and decided to do, as he called it, big cigar, big California with his cigar, and he went, and then I needed to go to a big party. And so he said he jumped off the bike, ran to the toilet, and by the time he got back, he was the last to go. So everybody else had gone. And he said they would light tires in the desert as like a signal flag, if you like, or a signal post that they would race too. So they were like point-to-point races. And by the end of the race, this unknown 16-year-old kid won the race. And it was huge news at the time.
Yeah.
And it was also the last ever mass start Big Bear desert race. So that's why it's called the Big Bear. It's a tribute to Eddie. And we were very honoured to have Eddie there. He's not a well man at the moment, and but he came out and he was so touched. And the story of the Interceptor is also about this Californian desert racing kind of backstory, if you like, because the Interceptor, it's post-war Britain. There's austerity in Britain, so people don't have a lot of money. But in the States, kids have got money, and so this is right at sort of the end of the reign of the British motorcycle industry. They start exporting to America and big bike sales. So brands like Royal Enfield and Triumph and Norton are all selling to the States, and they're using British bikes for all sorts of motorsport, flat track racing and desert racing and road racing. And Royal Enfield saw that opportunity, and so they took the what at the time was the Constellation, and they beefed it up and they made the first Interceptor. And there were a small run of them called the VAX Interceptors, and they were built predominantly as desert race bikes. And so to us, it just seemed like a really natural thing, and the other thing that we saw lots happening was people would buy our Interceptor and they would scramblerize it. They would stick sort of 50-50 tires on it, maybe put different suspension on it, all the normal things, maybe a high level pipe, maybe a number board, all those kind of things, and they would create a scrambler. But not everybody's got the skills or the time to do that, and so that was kind of the starting point was to take an Interceptor and create a proper 60s style scrambler out of it. We wanted to do something that had exactly that look and feel. So these were bikes that were, in those days you didn't have distinct genres of motorcycle. You didn't have a trials bike and a motocross bike and an enduro bike so you would take a road bike and you would modify it for the event that you were doing.
Yes.
And so that is absolutely the idea of this, was to take an Interceptor and create an authentic feeling scrambler. We wanted to create something that was really still accessible. One of the things that everybody loves about the Interceptor is just how accessible that bike is. That engine is such a peachy engine. It's got such a lovely torque curve. It's I think, as I was saying earlier, you get something like 80% of the torque at 20% of the RPM of the rev range, and that you just get that lovely flat torque wave all the way through. And so that accessibility of the motor, but also the seat height, the riding position, the way the bike feels when you ride it. And so we wanted to make sure we didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so we kept all of that, but also that we made it just a little bit more dirt road capable. So this isn't and I think it's important that people get it. This is very much a gravel road bike, if you like. We're not. Nobody's going to be doing Supercross on this bike. That's not the intent of this at all. And it's that trade-off of, if you're going to put longer suspension on it, especially if you're starting from a package that already exists, so the engine position, the sump position, the frame height. If you're going to put taller suspension on it, you will end up with a higher seat height. So how do you do that? Where do you pitch that to make sure it's balanced? So we kept it so that it hasn't pushed the seat up too much. We've increased the travel by 15 mil on the rear. And it being a twin shock means that you can only do so much in terms of suspension travel. You haven't got linkages that you can play with. And again, that is what makes it an authentic kind of scrambler. So, we focused on putting better quality suspension on it. So we've gone with Showa upside down forks on the front and Showa on the rear, which are the same base units as the Hemi, obviously tuned completely differently for this bike. So developed specifically for this bike. It's got a kind of a 80/20 road off-road bias tire on it that was developed for this bike with the Sayats, which works really well. And it works, it's a fantastic road bike, and it works really well as a gravel bike. And what's interesting about it is the way that the team have set it up. Initially, it feels quite a firm setup until you start riding it harder off road. And as you push it harder, the harder you push it, the more you work the suspension, and the better the suspension works off road. So actually, if you start gunning it off road, you find you can actually get it. It gets better the harder you push it. But on
don't worry, Mark. Don't worry about that. Nugget and I will be pushing the bear. One comes in my garage in the next couple of days, and believe me, Nugget and I will be pushing it and finding that limit. Is it a little bit more generous than you've conservatively described? Where does it sit? One of the things that interests me, though, in the redesign, it's not even a redesign; it's a retweaking to make it more dirt oriented. Is you've stretched out the steering angle a little bit there, I noticed, and so you've relaxed that steering geometry, and you've given it longer trail.
So that's a combination of things. So we've actually changed a lot more than it looks like, because it's got the same tank and the same engine, but it's actually an entirely new, I say an entirely new frame. The frame is based on the old frame, but we've changed quite a lot on the frame. Yeah. So if you look, the whole back end, the whole subframe kicks up and is a different form. We've braced the rear of the subframe more heavily so we can put up more luggage on the rear. We've changed the as you say, the geometry of the bike has changed slightly. That's partly to help us get the extra ground clearance, so to put a little bit more height in it. So, if you go straight up on a steeper angle, you can't get that balance quite as right. So the vehicle dynamics team that set the bike up, they've tweaked that to get that to the point where it still has fantastic road bike balance. I mean, this is
Yes,
an amazingly good canyon carver. We rode this over in the US near to Big Bear, and on the twisties there, this bike is just phenomenal. You can really, really push this bike on, and it is so good in the twisties.
yeah.
But so getting that balance, getting that road to off-road balance there, and it definitely, as I said before, this is definitely not a, if you compare this to the Himalayan, if you want to go fully, properly trail riding off-road, buy Himalayan. That's the right bike for you.
Yeah.
If you want to buy a bike where, you can ride on the road, you can deal with when you come to some broken roads, or you want to go and do a bit of camping, you want to take a fire trail out into the woods, you want to throw a roll bag over the back and do that sort of thing, this is the right bike. And it is that balance. I mean, there is clearly a very much a style quotient with this bike. It's very much capturing that look and that feel, that 60s image, and when you look at all of the color trim and graphic and everything we've done with it, all of that is to capture that image. So the change in geometry is to balance out that increase in travel at the rear, increase in travel at the front, sorry, to allow us to put a bit more luggage on the back, to allow us to be stable with a bit more luggage at the back as well. So all of that has been done to just balance that out a little bit.
Yeah. Engine's an interesting one. I mean, we were talking before we started there about the different engine dynamics and what's the preferred horsepower. And I said to you, it's so much more complex than that to satisfy me personally. And it's not just an all-out horsepower power war. I mean, I compared the T7, I compared it for you to the 890, and I actually prefer the T7 because most people fall over when it's slow. And when you've got that putty accessible torque that just comes on beautifully, it makes riding challenging things easier. So there's been not criticism, but some people say, the engine, this twin, is down a little bit on power. Having said that, you've got the 2-in-1 exhaust that gives it a little bit more power. But talk to me about the engine dynamic a bit.
So, I mean, firstly, I fully agree with what you're saying. And if you look at our history, again, the reason that Royal Enfield was in India today is because the Bullet, if you go back to 1948, 1950, the Bullet, it was the first bike with an articulating swinging arm, and it had this heavy crank, really torquey engine, and that's why it did so well in international 6-day trials. When you look at people like Johnny Britton and Jack Stoker when they rode the bike in the ISDT, and that I think is exactly that. It's that low down tractability, it's that low down torque, that dug that just pulls you through, and I think that's why so many people took them to the Himalayas, and it's what with the 411 Himalayan and then the 450, we tried to keep that tractability. And then going to the twin, again, we built a bike that when we built the Interceptor and the GT, we wanted a bike with that low down torque, that kind of smooth, easy tractable riding, and that this bike has that. As you say, the 2-in-1. We actually, when we were developing it, we saw a horsepower improvement. What we've done is pulled that back in a torque, so we've geared it so that we've now got slightly more torque across all the rev range. It's not a huge amount, but you can feel it when you get on the bike. You can feel it's just got a little bit more pickup and a bit more. And it makes a much nicer noise with that 2-in-1. And as I say, the way the revs come in on this bike, it's such a tractable bike. It's such an easy bike to ride. You can kind of pick it up from low RPM, kind of anywhere in the rev range or at any speed, and it just pulls through and takes you there. And it's just a very nice, easy bike to ride. We've got I don't know whether you're aware, but these bikes have got a slip assist clutch, which normally was superbike technology a few years ago and was for stopping wheel hop. But what it actually helps us with is creating a much lighter clutch action. So it means that on shifting up and down, you've got a much lighter clutch. So this has got a lovely gearbox. I think that's one of the standout things. The other thing we've put a huge amount of time and effort into at Royal Enfield over the past decade, and we've improved hugely, is our engine fueling. So we hired a guy called Takashi, who is an absolute magician with calibration, and I think this all of the twins have fantastic calibration, but this is just obviously we've learned a bit over the years and we've improved it, and the calibration on this bike is lovely. So that moment where you go from off throttle to on throttle to off throttle, the way the power feeds in as well, I think it's really nice for that. It's got a lovely calibration to it. It's and that again just makes it easier to ride. There's no snatchiness, there's no kind of all through on it, and so I think that combination, it's a very it's a delightful little engine to ride. It's a very rewarding little engine because you just get that feeling all the time of it's giving and it's in the right place, the right rev range, and I think it works really well for that.
Yeah, so one of the things that really excited me about the bike, having ridden extensively now with the Himalayan, is the show of forks on this bike. You put a lot of effort into getting that right, and I think you nailed that on the Hemi. And that's one thing that I'm looking forward to seeing is what you've done with that on the Bear. But that segues me into the next point, and that's, if you were going to make a Hemi 650, 750, the basic elements are there. You've got a wonderful engine, maybe a little bit down on power for an adventure bike, but still a wonderful engine. You've got the show of forks. You're starting to get a whole range of other things. You're starting to get some elements, and you've got this Hemi that we know is bulletproof. It's tempting, and I can't help but, like everyone else out there, see those spy photographs. What do you think about those ideas?
So I think, obviously I can't talk specifically about bikes that are in development, but what I can say is that, for the longest time, whenever I talk to customers, and I say, and I usually do this, whenever we're doing some research, the last question I ask is, look, if you had an elevator pitch moment with Sid Arthur, what would you tell him we should make next? What's the thing we should do next? And the number one answer is always 650 Himalayan. And even to the point where when we were developing the 450, I would say to people, but our 650 in the current trim is putting out about 47 brake horse. If you had a 450 that had 40 brake horse, would that not do the same job? Oh, no, we want a 650 Himalayan. So it's the message to us is loud and clear, and I understand why people like the idea of that. I get that fully. So I as I say, I can't comment on what we're developing, but obviously that kind of thing would make sense to look at. And so we talk to customers a lot. We listen to what customers want. We pick that information up. Obviously, if we were to do that, that's an if. It would have to be a very different product to the Bear. The Bear. So whilst all the elements are there, the Bear's a very different product in the Bear 650. It is the same 43 mil upside down front fork on the shower and the same RSUs, but the setup is very, very different. We haven't got anywhere near the travel on this bike. Yeah. It's much more set up for a road bias so that you don't have huge amounts of dive when you pull on the front brake. Obviously, if you were building an ADV with that setup, you would come up with something very, very different.
Yeah, because you've got the challenge of having the longer travel suspension, perhaps having the larger wheels, and you've got to get that seat height down. If there was a consistent thing that stops adventure riders buying bikes at seat height. If seat height's too high, that just chops them out, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's certainly why the 411 did so well with seat height, and it's certainly why the 450 does so well, I think, and we were really, really conscious of that. On the 450, we did a lot of moving the airbox over the top of the engine and making the bike as narrow as possible to get that seat height right, and we're always very conscious of that, and that's globally, whatever market you're talking about. seat height really, really matters. But in Asia in particular, where statures are a little bit lower, it matters even more. And I think also when you're a novice rider, I mean, I say it all the time, I'm not a very good off-road rider, but it's when
You're
you're
all right.
tired and you come to you've been riding all day and you come to a river crossing and you stood up and then you dab and then you put your foot down and then you're down and then you've got to paddle through. That seat height, then that's where it's killer. That's where you've got to get it right.
Yeah. The other interesting thing, in my personal garage, I've got a few big twins, a smaller twin at 500, a couple of 701, 690. But I have that Tenere twin there for a reason, and that's when you're on those big open outback tracks in Australia. There's nothing better than cruising along on a twin. I mean, look, I've done the Hemi out there and it's done its job well, and I've sat on 120 kilometres an hour all day and it just sits there. But there's something a little bit more relaxing about a twin. So I think that's probably another reason why people want to have a bigger capacity bike. They're probably actually searching for a twin.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the twin gives you that smoothness. It gives you that, it's the singles are good for that sort of low down grunt and for that width across the frame and the narrowness. You get but absolutely the twin does give you that. It's certainly a big twin. Maybe not a little capacity twin because they can be a bit washing machine like and a bit buzzy, but a big twin that has that low down torque does give you that nice smoothness to it. That's that.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thanks so much for talking to us today. Great to get your thoughts and ideas. And as I said, I'll be wrapping this up with some experiences from Nick Sanders, and we'll be comparing notes from, the theoretical and the practical in terms of the design to what Nick Sanders has experienced on the road. He's going to provide me a full and kind of detailed review. He's never done a bike review as such. So I'm really... I've given him a task, and I said, these are the questions I'm going to be asking you about the bike. Just like, as a motorcycle journalist, we're doing that all the time. And he says, oh, that's refreshing. And he's put all the effort in, and I'll talk to him in the next couple of days. And then Nugget and I will get out on one of these bears and we'll flog the living bejesus out of it and find that limit to where you're talking about with the dirt. And you never know. Knowing Nugget, I think he's going to find some error. I know it wouldn't be recommended, but I can't control the lad. I'd imagine he's going to test that to its limits. So let's wait. It'll all be in slow motion on Instagram.
I look forward to it. Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's a great fun little bike, and it as long as you understand the limitation, as long as you get that, this isn't a Hemi. Was never meant to be, but actually it's a really, really fun bike, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what you think of it. It'd be good.
Yeah, it's interesting. In Australia, most 80 to 90% of our tracks and trails are exactly what this bike can do, and that yes, we do have the extreme stuff, and have a lot of it, but at the end of the day, most people aren't chasing that for an adventure, and that's why I wanted to get the bike to see. Technically, we always had to be labelled adventure to do the job. And I think that labelling may cut off ideas as to what could be useful for you. I mean, this would be a wonderful commuter come, trail ride.
I think for me, I think of this as, so whereas the Himalayan is planned for adventure. So the Himalayan, you spend weeks planning it. You've got a map up on the wall. You've got all the kit, the panniers, the bags, the stuff you're taking with you. Yeah. This is like spontaneous weekend fun. This is like, hey, Dave, what are you doing this weekend? I thought we'd head out to the woods. You throw a bag over and away you go. And I think that's the difference between the two.
Yeah. All right, Mark. Thanks so much for spending a good, decent part of your life with me this morning, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Pleasure. Good to speak to you, Dave, and hope to ride again soon.
Okay, mate. See ya.
Cheers, buddy. Bye-bye.